My name is Sean Casey, and I'm the director of the Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs here at Georgetown University. It's my distinct honor to be moderating our second panel today, which is going to be focusing on local responses in long-term integration. And we have representatives of three, I would argue somewhat prejudicially, of the most interesting cities in the world, but certainly in the United States today, and we're honored to have them. I'm going to introduce everybody in the order in which they're going to present, and we are the digitally reclined panel. We will not be projecting any slides. And since there are only three of us, our panels have a license to go a little longer than 15 minutes, up to 20 minutes, and then we will turn, as Catherine did in her first panel, to questions from the audience, and I'll have a bit to say about that when we get to that point. But first of all, I'd like to welcome Ali Al-Sudani. He is the Vice President for Refugee Services at Interfaith Ministries for Greater Houston. In conjunction with the U.S. State Department and many other faith-based organizations, he helps lead the Greater Houston area in resettling legal refugees fleeing from political, social, or religious persecution in their homeland. So welcome, Ali.
Thank you.
Next is Sonia Lind, who is the General Counsel and Policy Director for the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs in New York City. Her efforts include providing equal access to resources available in New York City for immigrant communities and connecting them with important information and services to enhance their economic, civil, and social integration into New York City. So welcome, Sonia. It's great to have you. And then finally, we have Linda Lopez, and she is the Chief of the Office of Immigrant Affairs at the Mayor's Office in Los Angeles. She was appointed to her position in September 2013, where she is responsible for providing overall strategic advice to Mayor Eric Garcetti on his immigration policy agenda in creating innovative programs to successfully integrate immigrants into the Los Angeles social, economic, and political environment. So please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists. So Ali, please start us off.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. And I'm Maris Sudani. I was born and raised in Iraq. I came to Houston in 2009 as a refugee through Interfaith Ministries for Greater Houston and the Episcopal Migration Ministries. So I'm going to talk to you briefly about, I have 20 minutes or so, about the local responses and the integration and the services that we are providing to the refugees in Houston. But I would like to start by making a distinction between, the immigration topic is very broad, right? So we have different categories. We have asylees, we have SIDs, we have immigrants, we have refugees. And what we do, and some of the panelists in the first panel, they talked about is related to the work for the refugee resettlement program. So a refugee is someone who is forced to leave his or her country because either war or because of persecution due to 5 grounds. It's race, religion, nationality, affiliation to a social group, or affiliation to a political group. And then once, I'm going to use myself as an example because I went through this whole process. I wanted to have an idea about this journey and the work that we do here in the United States. So you leave your country, you cross the border of your country, you are a refugee. You stay in your country, you move from one area to another, you are an IDP. Example, Katrina hurricane, the evacuees who moved from Louisiana to Texas, they were IDPs. Just an example. These refugees, once they leave their country, they go to the country of first asylum. In my case, I went to Jordan back in 2007. You have to register with the UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, which is the highest UN body mandated to work with refugees and IDPs. Once you establish this status, then you are a legal refugee. That gives you certain protection, certain benefits, but it doesn't prevent the host government from deporting you. At that point, what do we do with the refugee situation? So there are 3 solutions. The UNHCR is defining them as the durable solutions for refugees. It's either you go back to your country if there is no fear, which is the best solution. No one actually wants to leave their country, leave their culture, their food, their friends, their status, and come to a completely different environment and come to a completely unknown environment. So that's number one. If that's not feasible, then the second one is going to be integration in the local community, which is, I could have stayed in Jordan, for example, which is usually they speak the same language historically. Countries hosting refugees, if we look at them right now, it's, well, we have in Lebanon, we have Lebanon, we have Jordan, we have Egypt, we have Turkey, we have Pakistan for the Afghan refugees. These countries hosting refugees, usually they have similar culture, food, language, for the most part. But there are limitations to this solution. It's either these countries, they don't have the legal framework for successful integration. What do we mean by legal framework? I think it was mentioned in the first panel that it's very important the self-esteem is very important for everyone. If you don't feel that you are legal or documented in a country, that puts certain pressure. Unless you experience this, you will not know it. So I was in Jordan, I was working, but I overstayed my visa. Like, that's the situation for all the Iraqis who left Iraq and went to Jordan at that time. And it was either you have $50,000, you put it in a bank, you get residency, so you are legal, right? If not, then you can't open a bank account, you can't get a driver license, you can't do many things. So I was, I was undocumented. I didn't have $50,000 too. I still don't have $50,000. Or simply they are saturated with refugees. Look at Lebanon. 1 of every 4 or 5 individuals is a refugee. Look at Jordan. Or simply they don't have the resources, economic, human resources that enable them to successfully resettle these refugees. The third solution is what we do here, which is resettlement in a third country. So these refugees, before coming here, you have to understand that they have to go through a lengthy process of background check and security check, and this can last between 18 to 36 months. When I came back in 2009, it took me a year. And I came and I was working with the British forces. I have contracts, I have recommendation letters, I have, so I'm not a complicated case, right? But I went through this process and it took me a year. So you have to understand this whole process. When these refugees are coming to the United States, it's a dream for them. And some of these refugees have been born and raised in refugee camps. Luckily, I was privileged to live my life in Iraq and go to school and have all of these things, but because of the current situation, the 2003 war, or the invasion, or whatever you want to call it, it's a debatable topic. But because of this, I had to leave because I was threatened. So this is what we do, which is resettlement in a third country, right? And the work of the refugee resettlement program, it's a public-private partnership. We call it a public-private partnership. So by the way, you heard the former panelists when they talk about 60+ million refugees, 1.3 million refugees in need of resettlement every year, 1% only they are referred to resettlement by the UNHCR. And historically, the United States took the lion's share in resettling more refugees than any other country in the world. That was before the Syrian refugee crisis to Europe, and now we are talking about the Canadian model, which is wonderful, actually, and the response to the Syrian refugee crisis is remarkable. But historically, the United States, we took the lion's share in resettling more refugees than any other country in the world. The process is that these refugees, when they go through all of this interviews and background checks, their information is going to be transferred from or sent from overseas. They are overseas, they are not here. That's important, so we are inviting them. It's going to be sent from overseas to the United States, reviewed, sent through the system of 9 national resettlement agencies to the local affiliate, and we review and we assure, meaning we confirm our ability to resettle this case. We say, yes, we can resettle this case, and here we go. And at that point, our work starts. From that moment, the clock starts ticking. What do we have to do? So we have to reserve an apartment or housing. According to the federal housing law, we have to provide furniture, we have to provide houseware, we have to provide clothing, we have to go to the airport with someone who speaks the refugee language. We have to register the children in school, we give them cultural orientation, we refer them to learn English, we address their medical need, we help them process their, social security and other legal documents, and we give them employment preparation courses, and we find them jobs. And that's the backbone of the refugee resettlement program. It really depends how you look at it when we talk about the integration of these refugees, because the goal of the refugee resettlement program is about protection, is about safety, right? So why we are bringing these refugees? Because their life is in danger. Why? Because we are good people. This is part of our history. This is who we are, and we can talk about the economic values, we can talk about the diversity values, we can talk about different values, but it's basically protection. It's a humanitarian cause, a humanitarian program that started back in the 1940s by a group of churches. There was no regulations, no Refugee Act, no State Department. It was a group of churches who came together, and they were able to help and provide the support for these refugees. The initial resettlement period is really, you can depend how you define the initial resettlement period, because it's 3 months, but then you have longer term integration, case management, and employment services that we provide to these refugees. If we want to define integration, and if we want to measure integration and the successful of the program, I can tell you that 90%, more than 90% of the refugees who are coming through Interfaith Ministries for Greater Houston to Houston, nationwide, the self-sufficiency rate is more than 90%. Self-sufficiency can mean different things, but if we can simply define it, is the ability to cover your expenses without support from anyone. I think all of us, we are self-sufficient at certain points, and we can be not self-sufficient at certain points. Like, it depends on the situation that we are going through. But the good point is that if we have the skills and the abilities that will enable us to navigate a system where we come back on our feet and become self-sufficient. So how do we do it? We have a staff of 29. We are from 10 different countries. We speak 18 different languages, which is important if you want to provide services to refugees from 12 different countries who are coming to us, right? And another big important part is the involvement of the faith group. When we talked about the Canadian model, the sponsorship model, it's a model that we have in the refugee resettlement program, which is basically the involvement from faith group in the resettlement of these refugee families. And I think if you look back and see who are the refugees who are most successful, I think are the ones who have a volunteer or church sponsor. But refugees are coming from different backgrounds, and they are coming from they have different expectations. Historically, we have urban refugees, and we have refugees who were born and raised in refugee camps. So the refugees who are coming from urban areas, their expectations are different. Their attitude is different. Unfortunately, the program was not designed to be adapted to the certain needs of these different categories. So the program, since the 1980s, there was no change in how this program going to address the need of certain refugees. However, it's not an education-based program, it's not employment-based program, it's a protection-based program. What do I mean by this is, like if someone comes as a refugee while they are receiving federal assistance, which is minimum, they can't say we will not actively participate in employment. They will be sanctioned from. The program is designed in this way. Now, is this right or wrong? That's another question. But as long as you are getting assistance from the government, which is public funds, then you have to be in compliance with the employment and you have to actively participate in this. Now, you can argue, is this really the right use of the federal funds when you have someone who's an engineer and they come to this country and they work in by the way, I have a bachelor degree in mechanical engineering, but I ended up working in the nonprofit. That's why we have these longer term integration, employment, career laddering, vocational training opportunities. And the system here in the United States, even if you are not a refugee, even if you are an immigrant and you have a degree in engineering from your country, you can't work in your field unless you have to go through the licensing process, which can take some time. I think I want to make sure that you understand the support that we are having for the refugees in Texas. So I'm from Texas. I'm Houstonian. And when I came, my perception about Texas was, like probably some of your perceptions. Right, because what do you know about Texas? You don't know. Unless you go there and you talk to people. We have been hearing in the first panel these different data. Pew Institute, refugees adding value to the economy. They are wonderful. We have all of these statistics. Data don't change attitude. You can't show someone who is convinced in a certain way, show them this is the statistic from this Georgetown University. They are not going to change their mind. They are not. And by the way, this is something not new. Look at our history. The Irish, the Italians, the Germans, the Jews. All of them, they went through the same attitude that we are facing right now against the refugees. So it's not something new. Data don't change attitude. Relationship, networking is the best approach. Texas is, so historically for the last 10 years, between 70 to 80,000 refugees coming to the United States, 7,000 coming to Texas, 2,500 coming to Houston. Texas definitely is one of the biggest. In some years, it was the biggest, the state that resettled more refugees than any other state, and Houston resettles more refugees than any other city in Texas. The support that we get from the community is tremendous. I'm talking about Houston. This is a red state, conservative state, but people are generous. People are supportive. People are welcoming. There was a question earlier in the first panel about the county doesn't want these, they prevented us. To me, that was a shock. This is just, in Texas, we don't have such a thing. All the mayors in Texas, in all metropolitan, like Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, El Paso, all the mayors and the local governments, they are very supportive for the refugee program and for the integration. Houston surpasses New York and LA in being the most diverse city in the United States. Yes, so we are, that was in, that's, go back to the Kinder Institute, and that's the
we'll bracket that question for another panel.
So I have some data.
Yeah. So we have all this support. We are diverse, we are multicultural. We established, see, this whole program, the refugee resettlement program, which is unfortunately under attack right now, it's just whether we like it or not. It's a program that has an infrastructure that can be really replicated in different countries, and it's really a strong program. It's not perfect, but this program is scalable. In the 1980s, more than 200,000 Vietnamese, they were entered in 1 year, 200,000. And we have seen this for the last 10 years. Some year you have 80,000, some year you have 60,000. So the program is scalable. And this scalability is because of the involvement from volunteers, involvement from churches, involvement from different civic groups. What we have seen recently is, honestly, simply the political will to bring these refugees. The key to any successful refugee resettlement is the policy, the legal status. These refugees, when they come, they are legal, which is huge. You can live and work since the day you arrive. You can get a driver license. In 1 year, you get a green card. In 5 years, you become an American citizen. If I knew that I would not get the American citizenship after 5 years, which is, by the way, if we compare this situation, for example, to Germany, the process is much more complicated when you are able to get the American citizenship. The policy is the most important thing, that these refugees are legal. They have the right to work and live here forever. Financial support from the government, I would say this is not the most important thing. If we have the refugees, we can come up with the funds. America is rich in every state. People are able to give, and they have the will to give. But we have to understand something which is very important. I'm finishing, yes. In my role right now as the VP of Refugee Services and Chief of Staff, I also oversee the Meals on Wheels program, which is feeding 4,000 seniors a day. We have to understand we need to look at this program and the services we are offering and the support we are getting, and we put it in a context of the average American person getting the services they need first, because this is currently the rhetoric that we are hearing from the other side, is that why we are supporting these refugees, why we don't support our citizens first. So we have to understand where are they coming from, and we need to convince them that it is not either or, there is plenty, there is enough for everyone, but we need to talk, we need to educate, and we need to raise our voices, and we need to continue advocating for this cause, and thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Sonia.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you so much for inviting us to join this conference and this panel. I am Sonia Lin. I'm from the New York City Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, and I'm here to provide the local government perspective. We've talked a lot about the need to sort of integrate immigrants, how to do it successfully, and it really is, and I know it's been mentioned on the first panel, it really is the role of local governments to do that, and we take that very seriously in New York, and I think we're seeing and working with other cities across the country that other local leaders are increasingly recognizing the importance of this work and working together to share best practices. So I'm really pleased to be here, and I want to just talk a little bit about the work that we do in the New York City Mayor's Office, or MOYA as we like to call ourselves, and give a few examples of how we have sort of responded to what we've seen nationally at the local level as well, and look forward to a discussion at the end of the panel. But just, the sort of 101 of our work at the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, we have a very broad mission. We're in the city charter, it's the law. We're obligated to do this, and it's a real privilege to advance this mission, which is to promote the well-being of immigrant New Yorkers. And we do this in a number of ways. We advise on and develop policies and programs that advance immigrant New Yorkers' well-being in the city. We provide technical assistance to our sister agencies throughout the city, recognizing that one office alone cannot do this work of immigrant integration and service to immigrant New Yorkers, but it really is the work of the entire local government. We have a multilingual outreach team that conducts strategic outreach to communities throughout the city with the goal of informing immigrant New Yorkers about resources that are available to them, about their rights, and truly working with communities to empower them. And we work in close partnership with a wide variety of stakeholders, local, national advocates, sister cities across the country, our government colleagues at the state and federal level to advocate for pro-immigrant policies that will benefit our residents here in New York City. I think this mission is broad, but the work is very full and the need is very urgent. We see it as very central to the work of local government, I think particularly in New York City, where about 40% of the population is foreign-born. That's about 3 million people. And if you take both immigrants and their children, then we comprise 60% of the New York City population. We are truly the ultimate city of immigrants. And it is a really interesting and very diverse population. Definitely not work that can be sort of one size fits all. Most immigrants in New York are citizens and have become citizens through the naturalization process. But we do have a population of about 1.4 million non-citizen New Yorkers who may be at different points along the road to citizenship, and that includes about 500,000 undocumented New Yorkers. Over 1 million New Yorkers live in a household where a member of the family is undocumented, so they live in mixed status households, and almost half of New Yorkers speak a language other than English at home, and about 23% have limited English proficiency. So from our perspective in local government, we have a really rich, diverse, incredible immigrant population that contributes to the city's social, cultural, civic, economic life in many ways. But we recognize as well that there are disparities that our immigrant neighbors face and unique challenges that we've talked about already and will continue to talk about. And our work is intended to address those barriers, reduce disparities, and increase access for all New Yorkers, particularly from our perspective at Moya, for immigrant New Yorkers. I want to talk about a few sort of policies and programs that we've worked on in the last few years under the leadership of our mayor, Mayor de Blasio, in New York City, because I think they're really good examples of local governments really taking action and really having success on local immigrant integration. The first that's potentially maybe the best known is the ID NYC program. I don't know whether anybody in the audience has heard of ID NYC, or the New Yorkers in the audience might have an ID card. This is a local municipal ID program. It is a very simple but very profound thing. It's government-issued photo ID issued by the City of New York that confirms the identity of the cardholder and confirms their identity as a New Yorker. It's available to all New Yorkers over the age of 10. We actually just lowered the age. And with demonstration of who they are and that they live in New York City. It's that simple. It's been, I think, incredibly well received in I guess since January 2015 when it launched. What we have heard from the card holders who have the card, we worked with an evaluation firm to conduct a survey of card holders, is that it really genuinely does, in addition to the day-to-day ways that it advances people's lives. People use it to enter city buildings. You can use it to go pick up your child at school. You can open a bank account at participating financial institutions. You can use it as ID in interactions with the New York Police Department. So it's sort of, people use it in many different ways, but one thing that was especially profound in the survey work that we did of cardholders was that many people reported that it increased their sense of belonging in the city. That was something that we hoped for. It was something that we had in mind in all of the work with stakeholders in designing the program. It was very satisfying to see that response come back through the survey work that we did. It's by far, we're not the only city in the country to have such a program. We weren't the first, and we definitely were not the last. There are these programs throughout the country now, but I think it's definitely the largest. We have 1.2 million card holders now in New York City, and we're entering, I guess, our fourth year, 2015, 16, 17, our fourth year. So that's one program that we've been very excited about rolling out, and I could continue to think about ways that we can further deepen and institutionalize it in the lives of New Yorkers. Another effort that we've been very proud to do, and I think it really resonates with some of the discussion that I've heard today, is to lead kind of historic levels of local government investment in immigration legal services. And so that's something that had been increasing from before the time Mayor de Blasio came into office. And then I think in the last several years in particular, we've seen the need to kind of increase our local investment, again, with this sort of recognition that supporting our immigrant residents along the path to citizenship, supporting their access to reliable, sort of safe, free, high-quality legal advice is a very important immigrant integration step, and also a very important step both in terms of empowering individuals and helping them avoid sort of fraud, exploitative practitioners, and so forth. We've in particular worked on a program known as Action NYC, working with a network of excellent legal service providers and community-based organizations to innovate kind of ways to deliver these legal services to immigrant residents in the communities where they live and the places where they are. So through this program, we have legal services available at CBOs in the 5 boroughs throughout the city, as well as through public schools, legal clinics at public schools, and the public hospital system. I think we've also gotten great feedback from providers and from community members about that. Sort of moving away from programs, we have done a lot of work at the sort of policy level, local law level, to ensure that our immigrant residents are able to access the services and resources they need at the local level. And I think a lot of that work both has been driven by sort of recognition of wanting to address what the barriers are. We worked with our partners in the City Council on a local law last year to expand the city's commitment to language access and expand what local government does in terms of making documents available in the most commonly used languages, ensuring that there is interpretation available for all New Yorkers when they interact with local government, regardless of their mother tongue, kind of lowering barriers in that way, promoting access in that way. We've also done a lot of work, again, with this idea of promoting access to make clear to New Yorkers that kind of the work of the local government, the work that we are doing is separate from the work of the national government with respect to federal immigration enforcement and wanting to maintain kind of the bonds of trust and interaction that we have with local communities and have done a lot of work at the policy level, at the local law level, to be clear and to kind of enact kind of clear boundaries between what we do at the local government level and what agencies like ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, do in limiting that cooperation between local government and federal immigration authorities. Again, with this idea of wanting to promote kind of trust and really safety and health for all New Yorkers. I think the thing that has been very exciting in my time working at Moya over the last 4 years is recognizing that New York City is definitely not alone in pursuing these programs and policies and putting them into place. And increasingly, we work very closely with our sister cities throughout the country to trade best practices, talk about different approaches, and really work together in coalition on a range of immigrant-related issues. We are huge fans of Linda's and her team in Los Angeles, as well as our colleagues in Houston and throughout the country. And I think we see this enthusiasm and this interest not only in the sort of big cities on the coasts, but really in small, medium-sized cities throughout the country, in red states and in blue states, because I think the perspective of local leaders is ultimately a pragmatic one that is thinking about what's best for my residents, what can I do to promote public safety and public health for everybody, and recognizing that having a strategy for immigrant integration is really integral for those sort of duties and responsibilities that we have. I do want to give one example of the ways cities have stepped in, or maybe two examples if there's time, ways that cities have stepped in to respond forcefully, I think in particular to some of the changes we've seen at the federal level. The one example I want to talk about is sort of the local response to the separation of families, of immigrant families, the crisis that was created by the administration's zero tolerance policy. So sort of soon after, we all became aware of sort of the scope of this crisis and the scope of family separations. We in New York learned that there were a large number of separated immigrant children who were in New York City in the custody of the federal government at federally contracted foster care facilities, but in New York City, about 300 separated children. And these were children who were much younger than the average age of children that were, that have been at these facilities, unaccompanied immigrant children, and who had sort of urgent needs that in conversations with the providers, the nonprofit providers, we in the city came to learn about and mobilized to help address. It was a really, I think, a moment of clarity for us to see what local governments can do. There was a strong interagency response from throughout the city government to kind of marshal existing resources and kind of create lines to provide additional access to these nonprofit nonprofit providers so that the children in their custody could have access to sort of urgent health care, additional mental health supports, recreational supports. We were able to organize kind of field trips and visits. We were able to help marshal some of the intense local support for these kids to channel donations towards things that the nonprofit providers identified as being needed, everything from teddy bears to playground equipment. We helped to supplement the legal assistance that was available to these kids and to their families, and to provide additional legal representation both for the children as well as for potential sponsors for the children and for their parents. I think worked in partnership with our sister cities to learn, what are you doing, sharing best practices to figure out how we could step in. We did some work to document this effort with a foundation, the Lumos Foundation, which is expert in kind of best practices for children in institutionalized settings, and kind of work to educate other stakeholders about what was possible and what best practices were and what the cities could do. And then as I think the situation has evolved and we've seen additional efforts from the national government to kind of roll back legal protections for immigrant children and sort of shift away from family separation towards family detention, we, meaning cities, have really stepped in to kind of, again, share our perspective and weigh in on the harms that we see in this approach, and to be clear that family detention, and sort of from our experience, from our vantage point, is not an acceptable alternative to family separation. So I think it's a good example because I don't know that for these kinds of crises, for these issues that are sort of originate at the federal level, are federal in nature. Sort of in essence, there is very much a local government component and an important local government perspective that increasingly we want to make sure gets recognized, and that we can weigh in and I think have valuable things to say. I think I will stop there. I think maybe we can talk further if there's interest in another looming federal change that we've been very focused on at the local level, which are prospective changes to a very sort of technical concept in immigration law known as public charge, and sort of what that means for localities and how cities like New York are responding. But maybe I'll hold that for now. We can speak more about it in discussion later.
Thank you, Sonia. Linda?
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here, all the way from LA, where I went from fires to snow. So it's been kind of interesting to be here. So I am Linda Lopez. I'm the Chief of the Office of Immigrant Affairs for Mayor Eric Garcetti. I've been there around 5 years. I'm trained as a political scientist, so I'm an academic by background. I've done a lot of policy work, mostly in communities of color and around civic participation. So moving in from an academic setting to political setting and working for elected has been really interesting in terms of learning on the fly how policy gets done and how things really move in this immigration space, which is obviously a very hot topic in the United States and around the globe. More recently, we have been very focused on refugee populations and really leveraging some of the expertise that local nonprofits like IRC, which is also here today, so I'm happy that they're here because we've been partnering with them a lot lately. Because one of the things that we find in this work is that there is a lot of expertise, especially with refugee resettlement organizations, and the idea being, how do we utilize that expertise and that knowledge to then apply it to these situations that arise, as Sonia has noted, with the unaccompanied minor crisis at the height of, for example, 2014 and 2015 in the United States, but more recently with this zero tolerance policy that the US government initiated at the border in separating children from their families. So to me, cities really are at the forefront when it comes to on-the-ground delivery of service, but also creating and enacting programs and initiatives that help support the integration of immigrants and refugees at the local level. And we're seeing this, I think, across the globe. We recently partnered with IRC on a report entitled Urban Refuge: How Cities Are Building Inclusive Communities, which highlights 23 cities around the globe that are partaking and advocating for immigrants and their integration, or refugees or asylum seekers, but also to build on innovative models to then scale those up, because we also recognize that LA is obviously different from New York, different from Houston and other parts of the world. So the one-size-fits-all model isn't necessarily something that we utilize in terms of our approach. It's very catered to the populations that we serve, particularly in LA, where, again, 40% also of our population is foreign-born, more than 220 languages, 66% of the people that live in our city, 4 million of the 4 million, are either immigrants themselves or the children of immigrants. So we really have sort of a huge diversity in terms of not only the population itself, but also this idea of mixed status families, where immigrants have, U.S. citizen-born kids. You may have a family, for example, that we serve in the city that mom has citizenship, dad has LPR status, and maybe the aunt is undocumented and the child is a U.S. citizen, all living in sort of one roof. So the needs are very different, and the way we approach it, I think, at the local level and in the city of LA, is to really understand that not all immigrants are the same, number one, but also that not all refugees are the same. And so our approach has to be we have to have cultural competency when we do this work as well. And we rely heavily, I think, with the experts, with local organizations that are really doing the work, really providing that direct service, because we don't see ourselves in terms of sort of local government in our office as direct service providers necessarily, because we realize that legal organizations have the legal training. We, I think, serve more as a convener. I think the convening power is something that we utilize and leverage to bring all these different stakeholders and actors when a crisis emerges, as is the case with child separation, as an example. The report, I think, that I mentioned to you really briefly highlighted some very interesting findings, which I wanted to share because I don't know if it was shared before, but comes to the issue, it really speaks to the issue of how cities are really generating a lot of different policies that are localized in nature, but also that impact these populations that are coming to their cities. And I'm sure that the fact has already been shared that 60% of refugees don't really live in camps or camp-like settings, but they live in cities. And when you think about migration and global migration that's happening in the world, a lot of the people that migrate are going to be essentially going to urban places, to cities. So I think that's one of the reasons why cities are really at the forefront and have to essentially figure out, sometimes on the fly, what to do with, for example, how to reunify families, especially with this particular more recent example. And I could tell you a little bit more about what we did in that particular case. But the highlights really are that cities are not only expanding services to displaced residents, but they're also creating new policies, they're creating innovative programs, and they're also collaborating with not your sort of usual stakeholders or allies. So the faith community has become increasingly important in the work that we do, I think, in the city of LA, because there is this sort of moment right now, this I think, movement of civic and collective action that's taking place in cities across America. where people want to volunteer, people want to be engaged on these issues about immigration, or whether it's how to volunteer to host a family that might be a recent arrival or a new arrival family. So I think we're seeing a lot of different stakeholders coming to the table now, especially the private sector. And I'll share an example of how we've worked with the private sector to provide financial literacy and education to refugees with the International Rescue Committee, but also to immigrants who don't necessarily have a tradition of a banking system, or don't really understand the financial system, because I think the idea there is, when people know or are knowledgeable about how the financial system works, the idea is that they're more likely to save money, and they're more likely to then purchase homes and build credit, and really be able to get those skills necessary so that they can enter that financial mainstream. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing in Los Angeles. The Office of Immigrant Affairs was established in 2013, so we're relatively new, by Mayor Eric Garcetti in 2013 when he took office. We are now in our second term. So I've been there 5 years, as I mentioned, and part of our mission really is, how do we, in a city that's so diverse, how do we essentially provide the tools and the services to immigrants and refugees who come to our city, and to be able to help them navigate through these different systems, whether it's city agencies or county agencies. So one quick distinction, Los Angeles is a city within a county system of about 88 cities, about 10 million people. So the proprietary, sort of the main departments that would be responsible for health, children and welfare services, are at the county level. We at the city focus more on departments such as rec and parks, community centers, the interfacing between law enforcement. So it's a little different in terms of, a place like New York, where it's sort of fully integrated in terms of the service delivery model and what local governments can do. So we're a little bit more limited, but nonetheless work very closely with our county partners in these different agencies to provide those wraparound services for immigrants and refugees. A couple of things that we've done in LA, one of the things that was very clear under this new administration is that there has been significant enforcement, particularly for individuals who are undocumented or don't necessarily have legal status in the country. And for us, it was really important, I think for our mayor as well, to develop a partnership also with our city council to establish a legal justice fund, particularly for people who are in deportation proceedings. So we've seen that really skyrocket, where people who don't necessarily have criminal backgrounds are essentially being apprehended and detained in detention centers in the United States, and don't necessarily have the right to counsel. So this is one way that we have essentially basically decided that it's important for these individuals who potentially have really valid claims, whether they're asylum claims or other claims to permanently stay in this country, to have the right to legal counsel. So we worked with philanthropy to provide those access to those services. It's a $10 million fund that was established last year. And within that frame, those legal services are provided to asylum seekers, to victims of domestic violence who may be eligible for T or U visas, to unaccompanied minor children. Also, we've expanded it now for the children that were separated and are coming to LA with their families and being reunified in our city. So this idea, I think, of a legal justice fund and legal services and legal service provision to us is very important. And I think it's something that other cities have also been developing as a model, or as a way to provide those legal services to people who are in detention or who are in removal proceedings. So we're seeing the outputs now with evaluation. We have the Vera Institute as our partner, who evaluates those different cases and work very closely with legal nonprofits who provide that direct service, about 17 legal nonprofits locally who were awarded grants to provide that legal representation. The second thing I wanted to highlight is our citizenship initiatives. I think one of the panelists earlier on said that citizenship, I don't know if maybe I'm misquoting, but that citizenship really is sort of the ultimate goal for status, to be a part of sort of the integration. When you think about integration, that's really the main thing that people want to get out of being in a country like the United States. So one of the things that we've done is to essentially create what are called citizenship corners in our 73 public libraries. So it's a city department, and we leverage our infrastructure, our city infrastructure, to be able then to provide those services to help people navigate the process of citizenship, which can be very complicated, actually. And you have to learn the language, you have to learn a lot of different elements of US history, and the list goes on. And it's a very complex process, and sometimes very challenging for people who do have legal permanent status to go to that next level. And so what we do is we encourage people to visit our libraries. We have librarians that are trained and can help individuals navigate that process. We now have also, I think we're like the second city that has BIA accredited organizations that provide legal service as well within our library systems to help people through that navigation of citizenship. And then more recently, last year, we opened up what are called New American Centers. It's an idea that actually emerged when I went to Germany 2 years ago. I was in Freiburg, Germany, and they had this concept of, they're essentially welcome centers. They provide wraparound services for refugee populations. So I took that idea, I kind of stole that idea, and I brought it to the attention of our city librarian, who said, let's do this. So we have 6 New American Centers in our libraries, which provide wraparound services for immigrant populations and refugee populations in the city. They're located in high immigrant dense areas of our city, so that people that may speak Korean. We have one in Koreatown. We have one on the east side where it's predominantly Latino and Spanish speaking, et cetera. So it's something that I think is a model that has now been replicated in other parts of the country. And it's a very easy way, I think, for us as a city, as a local government, to make those investments and innovations, and to be able to partner with organizations to provide that service delivery. The last thing I would say is, on the reunification effort, and I want to pick up on something that Sonia was talking about. That situation, and I don't really want to say it's a crisis, because I think that for us, we've been working on the wave of unaccompanied minor children since 2015, or at least I have, from a local government perspective. But the difference here is that with the separation, one of the things that we didn't really know is where these children were in our city and our county. So we were finally able to figure that out after a lot of investigation and working with our local nonprofits. And it turned out there were about 100 that we are aware of in some of our local centers, not in the city, but in the county. And I think one of the really interesting, moments for me as a appointee and working in government was how we were quickly able to mobilize all these different actors to address the situation and what we were going to do in the reunification process and post-reunification of these families. So we rely very heavily on the organizations that are on the ground to, provide them services. We developed a case management system along with some of the refugee resettlement organizations locally to reunify these families, and it's ongoing, because the other thing that we learned is that they're not all there necessarily. What happens is we receive word, or local nonprofit receives word maybe at 1 in the morning that the plane is coming with a child and will be reunified maybe with a mom or with a relative or a sponsor. So this process of how we work on these issues isn't always sort of determined and sort of foolproof, because there's always something that's happening on a daily basis. And I think that's one of the things that we, in terms of adding value of what local government is doing and cities are doing, is we're able to respond actually very quickly, because we've built that trust with local organizations to be able to then say, okay, you have a family of 3 that just got reunified yesterday. How do we find them housing? Or is there another family, for example, that would like to sponsor them? Have they received enrollment materials to enroll their children in the local school district? And so helping them, I think, navigate that process has been one of the I think one of the things that we as government have been able to do. But it's only because we are able to work with the local nonprofit sector to be able to deliver those services to those families and all the wraparound services that they're going to need. So I think that as we move forward, there's a lot of sharing of best practices that are emerging in terms of what is the role of local government in responding to some of these situations, but also overall, what is the response of local government in creating policies that are also immigrant inclusive? And there's a lot of those conversations, I think, that are happening with mayors, with cities, on how to work together, really, on some of these issues, so that we're not reinventing the wheel, but we're actually building on existing practice so that you can scale up. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Join me. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. So I think we have about 25 minutes left, so we're going to pivot to your questions. Let me advocate 2 things. Please raise your hand, and we'll bring you the mic. And second of all, please disguise your comment as a question, and be brief. So the more questions are asked briefly, the more answers we can get from our esteemed panelists. So simply raise your hand. I'll call on you, and we'll get a microphone to you. We have a questioner here in the front. Microphone is coming. Please tell us who you are and your affiliation, please.
My name is Gary Lichtenstein. I'm out of Arizona. I have a consulting firm that did a study of refugee integration in the Denver area. My question is, first of all, gratitude for all of you and all that you've done and the support that you have in your cities for this important work. It's really great you're doing it, and it's great you're here, so thank you. The work that was summarized by the panelists, by the 3 of you, talks about a constellation of services and resources that increase supports and decreases barriers for integration of immigrant and refugee populations. I'm wondering, do you have data on the success of these across programs over time? What happens to these families? Do they integrate? What does that mean, and what does that look like?
That's a great question. We definitely, I think, sort of program evaluation and assessment is a very important aspect of what we do, and so that's something that we do for our specific programs and initiatives. I think sort of the particular kind of data that you're speaking of kind of tracking the sort of integration of families over time is not something that we're doing currently, but I'd be very interested in thinking about how we could do that.
I can speak to LA. So it varies. So we do metrics, but sometimes I think in government, I'm trained as a social scientist, so I'm all about metrics, number one. But I think in local government, what I find is a lot of it is how many people did you serve? How many applied? For example, in citizenship, how many applied? So we track a lot of that data, but we haven't really systematically assessed and or even surveyed, for example, in our citizenship library work, which I think would be a magnificent thing to do. You know, we've seen overall 100,000 people through that initiative, but we don't really know, you know, how good was the service? Did the service actually matter to you? You know, all these different survey questions that we could ask people post, you know, receiving the service. So I definitely think there is a need to do that. And then the second thing I would say is we rely a lot on universities, on our local universities. So one of our main partners to do overall research when we want to know, you know, what are the economic contributions of immigrants, for example, is the USC Center for the Study of Immigrant Integration. So we work a lot with Dr. Manuel Pastor, who is, I think, now world-renowned when it comes to integration efforts, and he's done a lot of different research on a number of issues and programs. So we rely on his center a lot for just basic data or quick data facts. But we haven't actually done any assessments of our own programs, which I think would be really important to do. So thank you for the question, because I do think that it's something that we should definitely do.
I mean, that would be an interesting topic to take up in an intercity fashion. It seems to me
Yeah.
you both want the same kind of data.
Yeah.
And since we're seated at a university that has an institute, this might be a to-be continued conversation here.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's right. As Linda was saying, we track these like particular programs, these particular, right? Because we want to know, it's like, what is the term, return on investment for local governments or what have you. But I think that sort of bigger picture story of immigrant integration, is it working? What is the contribution of local government interventions? I don't know, that has definitely been on my list of like, it'd be really great if we could do this.
But for now, we don't really have a lot of time because we're always reacting to the latest tweet or the latest thing that's happening.
But yes,
I would love to do this.
Yeah.
We have another person in the second row here. Aaron, come up a little further, and then we'll go back there next.
Again, thank you all for a great panel. Two questions.
Aaron, can you tell us who you are?
Sorry, Erin Wilson, Associate Professor of Politics and Religion from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. So one question was the distinction between refugee and immigrant that came up in the first speaker's comments, and I wanted to ask about this in public discourse, because it seems to me that for a long time the figure of the refugee has been accepted, there's been no issue. The immigrant has been far more questionable. But it seems to me that in public discourse now, the distinction is collapsing somewhat. And so the refugee figure is also being criminalised. And I'm wondering, is that something that you notice? And if it is, how does it impact your work, if at all? The second question I wanted to ask was about the power of cities, I guess, in a way. I mean, one of the things, you talked a lot about the ways in which cities are challenging national government policy, but it also got me thinking about, you know, the cities who have come out and said, well, we are going to sign on to the Paris Declaration even if our national government is not going to. To what extent do you think cities are kind of emerging as future powerhouses? I mean, this is a big long-term question, but what is the capacity of cities, but in global networks, to challenge the power of nation states and in the area of migration, but also more generally?
Okay, I'll go ahead and answer that. So on the last point, the last question that you, I'll go last question and then the first question. So one of the things that we've been working on is how cities can be activated and advocate at the global level with the UN Global Compact on Migration, as an example. So there are a group of cities, including New York, that have come together to essentially tell the UN, because the United States withdrew, to tell the UN that cities have an important role to play, not only in the drafting of the document and sort of the negotiation of that and a seat at the table, but also in the implementation, because ultimately, when this thing gets signed in December in Morocco, which I'm actually also going to be going to, LA will be represented in that conversation, we're going to have to do this in cities. And so I think that there's a really interesting moment right now where cities are essentially leveraging not only their mayors in terms of sort of the leadership and the political will, but also engaging other actors, whether it's, for example, the UN or other foreign governments that are more friendly, if you will, or cities that are friendly in terms of building out a network of mayors and cities similar to the C40. I'm sure most of you are familiar with C40 and climate space, to be able to have a significant role in those conversations, but also on the implementation side and the negotiation. And I think that in December, there will be a cohort of cities that will come together globally to essentially play that role. And it's super exciting and something that I'm really excited about, because I think that we do have the ability as cities to not only share the knowledge that we have at the local level, but also to be able to say to these international bodies that we have a significant role to play as local governments. So I think it's super exciting. On the first question on narrative, this is my own personal opinion. I know I work for unelected, so I want to just preface that my sort of answer to that conversation. One of the things that I think I've learned in this process of being in this role is that immigrants do for whatever reason, are somehow different than refugees. And so I think that there's been this sort of narrative really of immigrants, and obviously more recently, that immigrants take jobs away from people, that immigrants are criminals, that certain immigrants do this and so on. And I think that narrative is very real. But in a place like LA, where you have a significant immigrant rights tradition in terms of the organizational capacity, I mean, we have some really strong actors in terms of advocating for immigrants. The state of California, in and of itself, has created some of the most, profound and impactful pro-immigrant policies in the nation. And so I think that there is a movement around sort of countering that narrative that immigrants are bad, or the good and the bad immigrant, et cetera. When it comes to refugees, I find that the work is, for whatever reason, and this is my own personal opinion, for whatever reason, is just so much easier to do, because people somehow, I don't know what it is, they maybe feel more compassionate to a refugee because of maybe the experiences that they see on television or the images that media potentially portrays. I don't know what it is, but I have an easier time getting a private funder to fund something for refugee populations than I do for, let's say, undocumented populations sometimes. So it varies, but I think that in a place like LA, we're seeing more of a coalition building, I think, which is really also exciting, of immigrant rights serving organizations, sort of the traditional immigrant rights advocacy organizations, coming together now with refugee resettlement organizations, with faith organizations, and other allies, frankly, that haven't really been in this space to sort of bridge and to do that bridging, which is, I think, really critical right now, so that they're not pitted against each other. So I think that we're in an exciting time for that.
Yeah, I would say I've seen a similar move in New York of those sort of service organizations and advocates who work with refugees and those who work with other immigrant populations, recognizing more and more how much there is in common, and that sort of, especially at this time, sort of identifying those areas of commonality and alignment is really important in order to serve these populations. And I feel like we've had really important conversations with colleagues like Hans from IRC about that work. And I think from the local government perspective, right, I think I agree there has been some sort of distinction between those formally designated refugees who kind of enter the United States through the refugee resettlement process. That system has been sort of separate for a long time. And so I can see how, just the stakeholders and the partners and the providers may be different. But from our perspective in local government, these are our residents. We recognize that there are kind of particular needs or vulnerabilities amongst kind of new immigrants in New York who are here for humanitarian reasons, whether they've been formally designated a refugee by the government or by some governmental body, or whether they are an asylum seeker who fled traumatic conditions in their home country, and that there are particular needs here. So I think, just sort of to echo what Linda said, it's like we have this ground level perspective that doesn't necessarily distinguish, but sees the need to serve in a sensitive way.
All right, we have the young woman in the fourth row, then we'll come here, front row, then second row. All right. And you guys over here got to work at it. I'm seeing all the hands on this side.
Hi, my name is Andrea Tanco. I work at the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute. I'm originally from Veracruz, Mexico, so I'm actually interested in hearing more about the role of your respective cities in reuniting families. What have been some of the legal challenges in crossing the line between the federal policy and the federal mandate? And then what have you been able to do as a city? More so when it's like a federal law that it's been enforced and federal contractors, but you as a city have that jurisdiction. And I would like to hear more from the LA point of view, if there's any cross-border collaboration, or if you've been working with the government of Mexico in kind of dealing right now with the crisis of the caravan, because while this might not be like a new phenomenon, it's the first time that we've seen it in this scale and that we've seen this flow. So how is LA preparing to kind of receive these families that probably are heading towards California?
Great question. Should I answer, or you want to answer?
Sure, I can speak a little bit to our work on sort of working to support the reuniting of families. I think you're speaking to the families who experience family separation. And I know, Linda, you spoke about this in your remarks as well. I think for us in New York City, again, we had kids who were separated from their families in New York City, a large number of them. Our work was really, but as you noted, right, it was a situation that was brought about by federal policies and practices, and one that the federal government was ultimately responsible for addressing, but failed to do so. And so I think we saw ourselves, as well as other cities and many other stakeholders, stepping in to fill that gap and to address the trauma of separation and address the need for reunification. Where we came in was in supporting legal services for these families. There were federally funded providers who did know your rights and legal assistance and representation work for separated children, but there remained gaps. And so we designated, we allocated sort of already designated funding to make sure that there were lawyers available to separated kids, to their sponsors, to their parents where applicable, and so that they could sort of enforce their rights and pursue kind of the best forms of relief available for them and for reunification. And we worked really closely. I think the convening power that Linda spoke about in her remarks is a very important one for us in the city, to be able to bring providers together, to be able to reach out to others throughout the country to find out what's going on and how could we as a city sort of plug in and support and support this effort. It's definitely work that's ongoing. We work really closely with the nonprofit provider community, both in New York City and nationally, to address. And I think we've also used kind of our and I don't know exactly the right term, it's sort of our role, sort of almost like the bully pulpit in a way, to raise more awareness of the challenges facing these families and the situation for families who are coming to our country seeking protection, seeking refuge, and contending with what they're finding here. And so we actually sent a delegation of city lawyers and city social workers on a volunteer basis to volunteer pro bono and provide assistance to detained moms and children at a family detention center in Texas. I think it was there, the delegation met with children who had been in New York during the family separation crisis, and then were reunited with their mothers, but in a detention facility in Texas. And I think it was, a really meaningful experience for our volunteers, but also a very instructive experience for us throughout the city to hear from that delegation about their experience and and how they were able to sort of, I guess, bear witness to the trauma that we are inflicting on these families and kids.
I would just add that I think Sonia is spot on. We did very similar things in LA. I think for LA, the reason why this is so important too is because we realized that many of these families and their children, after they're being reunified, would come to our city simply because of the fact that we have the largest concentration of Salvadorians, Hondurans from the Northern Triangle countries, who either have relatives or somebody that they know in the city. I'll give you one example. This work is, I should describe it as, it's kind of like working in a place where there's so much unpredictability because it's literally like one family at a time. So I'll give you one example. We had worked initially with Catholic Charities locally. They had an attorney that we were working with. They one day told us, 56 families are getting on a bus from different parts of the country, and we know who they are, and they're coming to the city. And they're going to require not only legal representation, but they're going to require housing. They may be able to stay with, a relative or somebody, but they ultimately, need to find something. Or they don't know how to use the transportation system to get to their appointment, for example, for, their court date and all that kind of stuff. So it really varies in terms of, what the need is, but there are certain commonalities in terms of what the services are that they need. Many of them also need mental health services because of all the trauma that they've experienced in that journey, but also in terms of, just being separated. So we work very closely right now with the school district, and they have a center. It's called the SEPA Center, which is essentially a center that got started in the 80s, actually, during the first Central American wave in the city of LA, where they essentially do a lot of the one-on-one enrollment with some of these children and their families, with unaccompanied minors as well from Central America. So they have a lot of experience and also can refer some of these children and their parents to mental health services on site at the school district. So it's a pretty remarkable wraparound service unit in the school system that's available for these families as well. So, it's sort of day to day, and it's ongoing, as Sonia also mentioned, because as everybody knows, not all of the children have been reunified with their parents, so that's still ongoing. Obviously, there's some litigation too in the Flores litigation that's happening, but we do what we can, and I think that one of the beautiful things about this whole experience has been that you find a lot of different resources and a lot of good, compassionate people that want to do the right thing at that moment, and you're just you sort of have to grab onto those people and those institutions to be able to lift those people up so that they can thrive and be successful in our cities. On the caravan issue, we work very closely with the Mexican consulate on a number of issues. Sometimes they are cross-border issues. We haven't really worked with them on that particular issue at this point, but we obviously realize that it's something that we have to prepare ourselves for, especially because most likely they'll end up in California somewhere, or even other border states. But definitely something that we're monitoring as well, and it's I think something that's really ongoing for us right now. But we do regularly work with consulates. We worked with the Central American. Some of the Central American consulates on the family-child separation issue and brought them to the table also, and the Mexican consulate, actually. There weren't a lot of Mexican nationals or children and families that were separated. They were mostly from the Northern Triangle countries, so we worked directly with those consulates as well. And on the issue of detention, consulates have the ability to go inside of these detention centers. So unlike us, local government, we're not able to readily just knock on the door and say, hey, can we go inside? So we aren't granted access for the most part. But I should say 3 weeks ago, we were on a delegation with Human Rights First, who the organization which basically is dedicated to human rights, but also evaluates and does reporting on is doing a lot of reporting on a number of the detention centers across the country. They're doing one in California. We have about 10 detention centers in California. So we visited Adelanto Detention Center, which is about 90 miles east-north of LA in the desert. And we took a small delegation there to essentially examine some of the practices that are happening in that detention center, because more recently in May, the Inspector General's office found that several violations, including suicides and denial of medical care and other kinds of things. So we work with organizations that have the expertise to do these fact-finding missions, and be able to also, be present and to, see what's actually happening in some of these detention centers. The last thing I would say about that is one factoid with Adelanto, which I did not know, and I want to share it with all of you since, I think it's important. Half of the people that are in there are asylum seekers. They have credible claims for asylum. Out of the 1,700 people, they're women and men, adults. It's an adult-only facility. Half of them, so 800 plus or so, are eligible, but they don't have legal representation. And so to me, that speaks to the importance of legal representation for these individuals, some of whom have been detained for 8 months, 12 months, longer periods of time. We were able to interview with some of them, some of the women that were there. So I think what I want to say, I guess, is a punchline is we really need to also think about, how to provide legal access for some of these individuals who have been detained in some of these detention centers. So I really think we should advocate for that, and something that we really need to do collectively.
All right, due to time constraints, Father O'Donovan, it's the last question, and I apologize to other folk who had their hands up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, panelists, for your presentation, but even more for your work. 2 comments, and then I have a question. Linda, you mentioned your great state, and what state has more resisted the federal government than the great state of California? And I'm a New Yorker. And the second comment is, with regard to, I'm from Jesuit Refugee Service.
Okay.
With regard to our discussion of refugees and migrants and the differences and the collapsed differentiation, if you're fleeing climate change, it's very hard to know what category you fit in. And I just think that if anything came of this afternoon, if the public, if somebody could get to the public and let them know why there's a difference, but also a declining difference, why it's imperative to keep the refugee system, but also to understand the rights of immigrants, it would be a great contribution. My question, though, is, in your work, to what extent does your work intersect with your city's address of racial tensions, chiefly with black people in your cities?
I'll take a shot.
Well, I think this is a government's question. No, I can tell you my perspective about the racial issues and the intersection with our work. I know we have a very good mayor in Houston who is very supportive for the immigrants and refugees. And I think that the work of the nonprofit, they are addressing this on multiple levels and seminar and talking about this and address these, racial tensions. In our work with refugees, we don't particularly deal with this issue, but I know it's an issue that exists, and I know that it has been addressed at different levels. How successful, it's debatable.
Any quick final comments?
I guess I would say on the question about kind of addressing racial inequality in our cities, I think, and I can't speak directly to that for New York City, other than to say that racial justice, of course, is a lens that's important for us across local government to bring to our work, in the same way that sort of immigrant access and immigrant integration is an important lens for us all to bring. It's not the work of one office or one staffer to do, but is something that is sort of urgent for all. That being said, there are there's the work of the New York City Human Rights Commission to uphold our local human rights laws that protect sort of all, regardless of race, color, national origin, immigration status, religion, family status, et cetera. And I think one thing that's very interesting in New York is that oftentimes there's considerable overlap between racial justice issues and immigration issues. Because of the diversity of our immigrant population, we have a significant and fast-growing Black immigrant population coming from many different parts of the world. And I think for us in local government, it's incumbent on us to recognize kind of the intersectionality and the challenges that Black immigrant populations face, both sort of bias and discrimination on account of race and color, as well as national origin and immigration status. And so, those are important conversations that we have a lot in local government with our partners, at the Commission on Human Rights, or in our, oftentimes it's intersectional with issues related to gender, and, our partners at the Commission on Gender Equality, and so on. And so I think it really does take an interdisciplinary approach. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
You
You want me to?
any closing remarks?
Okay,
Just,
yeah. So I think that this issue of how do you create a social justice model for all is extremely relevant right now in our country. So for me, it's not only about, this is my own personal opinion again, it's not only about, how do you find, social justice for one group at the expense of another group. And I think what you're seeing now on the ground in a city like LA is the transformation of a belief system in terms of how do you engage people from all races and religions and, sexual orientation, et cetera, to build a social justice movement, if you will, that recognizes our differences, but yet also recognizes the commonalities that we have as human beings, and that an assault on one, what is it, the saying, an assault on one is an assault on everyone, or I can't remember what the proper term is, or on all of us. And I think that because we have such a rich diversity in our city, I don't think the idea is to, only focus on, for example, I know I represent the Immigrant Affairs Office, but how do you build cross-racial, cross-faith movement to be able to address some of the disparities and discrimination that exists in certain sections of our city, because we do have inequality. I think that philanthropy is doing and starting to have these conversations also. I think in terms of equity, how do you create an inclusive and equitable city? How do you create educational systems that are equitable, et cetera? So I think that there's a lot of conversations happening in our city around how to build out a city that is for everyone, and a city that represents everyone, and a city that is inclusive of everyone, and create that equitable city. I think that's really part of what we're trying to accomplish. And I also see it in organizations that are immigrant rights organizations that are now saying, we need to start, going to meet with organizations that are doing, more work around, let's say it's the criminal justice system, for example, with African American populations, or, so I do think that there's definitely a moment again where you're seeing the initial sort of beginnings of cross-racial, cross-ethnic movements in cities that hopefully can start to address some of the inequities that we have in our cities.
So as your moderator, I have two final requests. One is in anticipation of Denis McDonough arriving, I ask you to please move forward and squeeze in away from the aisle so that more people can fit in. And secondly, join me in thanking our panel today.